Hello, everyone. Greetings from Istanbul. Welcome to TRT World Forum's Digital Debates. I'm Merve Akın. I'm a deputy researcher at TRT World Research Center. Today, we will discuss Turkiye Israel relations, which will be the first session of this year's digital debate series. Turkey's Middle East policy, time for de-escalation and normalization. Joining me today, Galia Lindenstrass. She is a senior research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies of Tel Aviv University, and Amichai Stein. He is the diplomatic correspondent at Israel's public broadcast, Kan News, and Yusuf Erim. He is the editor at large at TRT World. I welcome you all. So, the relationship between Turkey and Israel has ebbed and flowed since its formalization in 1949, going through multiple ups and downs along the way. Since 2008, diplomatic relations have been kept to a minimum level. However, after years of tensions, several Middle Eastern countries, including Turkey, have embarked on a journey of reconciliation and fence mending. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan recently hosted Israeli President Isaac Herzog in a landmark visit. President Erdogan described this step as a turning point that aimed to revitalize political dialogue and increase cooperation between the two countries in various fields. While there remain some significant areas of disagreements, such as the Palestinian issue, the potential for enhanced relations is real, with both parties capitalizing on future joint opportunities. So, in this session, we will examine the possibility of rapprochement between Ankara and Tel Aviv and explore the wide range of mutually beneficial opportunities as well as the obstacles facing these relations. So, without further ado, Yusuf, I want to start with you. Herzog visits to Turkey was the first presidential meeting since 2008. So, can you tell us how significant is this meeting and what differentiates this rapprochement from previous initiatives and periods of reconciliation?
Well, first of all, obviously, it's a very significant visit. 15 years since a top-level Israeli official has visited Turkey. So anytime when you have such a gap in between top-level visits, it's very, very important hosting the president of another country. And these types of visits are very important in progressing on the relationship. Now, when we look at what's happened over the past 15 years since the last presidential visit, we see that relations have cooled off. There were many geopolitical reasons for this as well. There were many bilateral reasons for this as well. But while this cooling off period happened, we saw that commercial ties still remained strong. We saw that tourism between the countries still remains strong. And we saw that there was still a lot of bilateral interest remaining, but diplomatically, it required a period of cooling off. When we look at previous attempts to reconcile versus the rapprochement going on right now, why does this rapprochement have a chance of being more successful than the previous ones? One of the things I believe is the rapprochement right now is actually supported by the dynamics and the geopolitics of the region. We are seeing a period where there is a general perception amongst all the actors in the Middle East that there will be less U.S. engagement going forward. So many of the actors understand that they need to start creating mechanisms to solve issues themselves in the absence of the United States in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So we're seeing these mechanisms take place. There's also an understanding that the United States is going to return back to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. This is going to mean a much better funded Iran. This is most likely going to turn into a more aggressive Iran. So many countries are making their calculations for more Iran-backed proxy action in the region, possible hot kinetic engagements in the region. That's another very important reason. And another reason is it's been a decade since the Arab Spring is over. Now, the Arab Spring really divided the region, especially along ideological lines. And along those ideological lines, Turkey and Qatar, Iran, a couple other countries found themselves on one side, and you had Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Egypt on another side. And Israel was watching more on the other side, of course, but seeing what's going on in the Muslim world during the Arab Spring. Much of foreign policy was based upon this ideology. And many countries, when they were engaging in trying to exert influence or project power in a regional neighbor, they pick and chose segments inside that neighbor. So you had non-state actors become more important. You had political parties become more important, and you saw less and less sovereign to sovereign engagement. So this period resulted in rapprochements or reconciliation process that was not productive. But we're now seeing the return of realpolitik. And with the return of realpolitik, we are seeing an upgrade of sovereign to sovereign engagement once again, and a downgrade of non-state actors. At least this is what I see for the decade ahead of us. And I think all of these reasons make this rapprochement stronger. And of course, there's a lot more aligning together, as I said, with the JCPOA and Turkey's changing threat perception of Iran. We have a security alignment once again between Israel and Turkey, where they both see the same threat. Again, they both see the U.S. leaving. They see a same opportunity and a same challenge. So there's a lot of alignment going on here. And at the end of the day, when you look at the Middle East, when Turkey looks at all the actors, who is the most similar to Turkey? I think most Turks would say Israel, both being a democracy, both being non-Arab in this region. Turkey was the first country to recognize Israel, first Muslim country to recognize Israel. So there's a deep history. There's a deep history that goes beyond Turkey and beyond the state of Israel, back 500 years. So it's a reconciliation, not similar to the Abraham Accords, where it was an original recognition. So this is very different. But to close out my words, because I want to give the floor to our guests, to close out my words, it is a reconciliation. There was a strong foundation in this relationship, and it only requires rebuilding that foundation.
Thank you, Yusuf, for this great summary and framing the issue with all different dynamics. So, Amichai, Yusuf mentioned the relationship frozen since the last 15 years and the cooling of the relations. So this brings me to my question. During former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's term, channels to maintain dialogue between the two countries were scarce. However, Herzog has appeared as a figure that could facilitate more productive dialogue between Israel and Turkey. Although he represents more of a symbolic authority in the Israeli political system, is it possible that Herzog could make a real difference in Turkish-Israeli relations? And I also wonder how the other parties in the coalition, as well as in the opposition, particularly Netanyahu's Likud, regard the normalization process. The floor is yours.
So Herzog is the best person to do it in the best time right now, because on the one hand, Turkey doesn't see Herzog as a person who gets decision done in Israel, meaning Herzog doesn't press the red button to go for an operation in Gaza or the West Bank. It's mainly Bennett and Lapid. And at the end, he's not the person who gets things done here. So if there's, let's say, a relation start and there's some kind of a war in Gaza, at the end, he's not the person who got the decision to go for war in Gaza. So that's why for Turkey, it's really easy to speak with him. On the other hand, also for Bennett and Lapid, it's really easy to give the floor to Herzog, because we know in recent years how the Turkish-Israeli relations are going, meaning they were good, then bad, then good, then bad. And Bennett and Lapid asking themselves probably, why do we need to go again to this kind of adventure? But when you put Herzog as the front person in the story, it makes it much more easier, because let's say things start rolling up and then things will go back to being bad like they were in the past. It's easy for them to say, listen, it's not us. It's not me. It's not Lapid. It's Herzog. Herzog wanted to do it. It was his idea. He met Erdogan. So it's very easy for both sides to go to Herzog and make him the front person in this kind of relations. Although, like you said, he's not a person who gets decisions done and his job is symbolic. But that's exactly probably the reason why it's so easy for Herzog to do this negotiation thing. And you need to remember, when we saw him in Turkey, he said, I'm opening the new page, meaning the chapter is open. I'm at Erdogan. It looks like a new beginning, but the real job will need to be done by the ministers themselves, by the government themselves, meaning I'm not going to solve economic ties or diplomatic ties, or if there's a crisis, I'm not going to be the person who is supposed to solve it. So he sees himself also as the person who opens a new page, but the real work will have to be done by the two governments.
Mute.
So sorry. Thank you, Amihai. I think the situation will depend on the internal dynamics of Israel as well. So, Galia, at the press conference during his visit to Turkey, President Herzog underlined the deep cultural ties between the two countries. Based on the long history of the Turkish Jewish community and the shared Abrahamic roots of Judaism and Islam, what can you tell us about the significance of these cultural relations? Where can we place the importance of these largely symbolic elements in Turkey-Israel relations?
So thank you for the question, and thank you for having me. Yes, during the decade of more than a decade of crisis between Turkey and Israel, a lot of areas were affected by this deterioration of relations. But there were some issues that were not affected, as Yusuf mentioned, trade, tourism. But interestingly, also cultural ties were relatively not affected. And I think this is both because of the cultural affinity between the two people, but also curiosity, genuine curiosity and interest in the other country's culture. So this is a very important element that we should develop further. Of course, we also have the Jews in Turkey and the Jews from Turkey who immigrated to Israel. From all the people I've met from these communities over the years, they're very proud community, and they're a wonderful bridge for developing the relations between the two states. So this is really an asset we have. Another issue I want to highlight is, yes, over the years, if you look at the history, basically Jews suffered more from Christians than had problematic relations with Muslims. And we know the issue of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, both deplorable phenomena. And there are things we have learned over the years from combating anti-Semitism that can be also employed to combating Islamophobia. And of course, in places where Jews or Muslims are a minority and are treated as the other, this is something that should be condemned and should be treated. There is, however, one issue that explains why anti-Semitism has been so persistent over history. Why we haven't been able to eradicate it. And this is a difference I want to highlight. There is this perception, the mythical power of Jews and their ability to control events. This flaw understanding of history. This is one of the reasons why anti-Semitism has been so persistent. And this is an important difference we should be aware of. Thank you.
Thank you, Galia. This is a very good point. So we will discuss social relations further. So my next question is for you, Amichai. When it comes to Turkey-Israel relations, a major issue of disagreement is Israel's policy towards Palestinians. Ankara always highlights its position very clearly. Turkey will not abandon its support for Palestine and will uphold two-state solution. President Herzog also touched upon this issue implicitly in his speech. How can this normalization serve for the betterment of the lives of the Palestinians? And what is Arab Israel's opinion regarding this normalization process? What is your take on this issue?
So first of all, I think this is an issue that both sides agree to disagree on. Meaning, like in any other relations with any other country in the diplomatic world, there are issues you agree and issues that you don't agree. So I think the two countries, like you said, Herzog put it on the table, Erdogan put it on the table. This is this is each other position, and probably they don't agree on the manner. But this is an explosive issue on the table because it can derail the relations like we saw in the past. I think maybe Erdogan coming into the region at least may help to establish better ties between Israel and the Palestinians right now. So Turkey, which also the Palestinians keep good relations, he might be able to be like a middleman, him or any other Turkish officials, like a middleman between the two sides, maybe try to calm things down. But I don't think you will see suddenly a peace process bursting out of this Israeli-Turkish relations, but at least keeping things maybe calm down. You know, a big demand on the Israeli side is that Turkey won't allow Hamas to act freely from Turkey. Now, let's say Israelis are realistic. They don't think that President Erdogan will tell Hamas, go out of Turkey. But this, again, this is one of their dreams out of these relations. They are thinking that maybe they can limit the activity of Hamas in Turkey. Maybe Erdogan can help calm down Hamas. So this is, again, dreams right now. We don't know how it will work on the ground. And I think when you ask about our Arab Israeli looking at this. So remember, we have one Arab Israeli party in the coalition itself, which is Ram. And I don't think anyone opposes this kind of relations between Israel and Turkey. I can tell even more. You didn't see even from the Likud party of Netanyahu's any comments against this process. Now, it's really easy to come and attack Bennett. Why are you going to speak with Erdogan after he attacked us so many times? And Netanyahu didn't do it. No one really did it. So I think at this point, it's a consensus. If things change and if things develop not in a positive way, but the different way, then we might see different reaction from different people over here. But at this point, it's really the relations are right now a big consensus is Israel to go for this kind of move. Let's see what it
Thank you, Amichai. As our title, the Turkey-Israel relations water under bridge, I think there are many issues to discuss in the near future. So Yusuf, regarding Turkey's position in the Palestinian issue, I guess you have many things to say. Can you tell us briefly what are your thoughts?
I was just taking some notes while Amichai was speaking. And well, first of all, one of the things I want to say is that Turkey's Palestine policy has been the same for about 7 decades. It hasn't changed. And it's not a government policy. It's not a partisan policy. It's a state policy. We've seen right-wing governments carry out this policy. We've seen left-wing governments carry out this policy. We've seen centrist governments carry out this policy. And I don't foresee it changing anytime in the near future. Now, that being said, even though the policy hasn't changed in 7 decades, we've seen how good the relationship can be in the 80s and 90s and early 00s. And we've seen how bad the relationship can get. So I think both sides understand that there are flashpoints. And one of the things I was very happy about during the press conference was that both Erdogan and Herzog addressed the elephant in the room. They did not stay away, or they did not misrepresent what this is. They both stated very specifically that they understand there are flashpoints, there may be setbacks at times. It may be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it got the ball rolling. It's going forward. And I think both leaders understand that there needs to be a coping mechanism to be able to deal with these flashpoints. If on a government-to-government level, relations can increase and more safety nets are created. What are safety nets? Increasing bilateral trade is a safety net. The possibility of a pipeline, that would become a safety net. Other types of maybe defense cooperation, technology cooperation, culture, tourism. These are all safety nets. And the more safety nets you build, they're able to keep the relationship afloat during times of flashpoints. And they make the issues more compartmentalized, easier to compartmentalize going forward. Now, when I first spoke, I talked about the value of non-state actors being downgraded. in the period ahead of us, I believe, as sovereign to sovereign relations are back becoming more important with a shift to realpolitik. I think that concerns regarding non-state actor groups like Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, other types of groups. Now we've seen Turkey and the UAE rapprochement, very, very successful, moving forward much quicker than many anticipated. UAE has the same concerns. Turkey has different types of concerns regarding UAE, but we can see that concerns regarding non-state actors, concerns regarding exerting influence in other countries has taken a step back for bilateral relations. And I think this supports my analysis of us entering as a region the age of realpolitik. So I don't think that the Hamas issue will be as much of a flashpoint as it has in the past. Turkey does not allow anyone to attack another nation using its soil. Turkish intelligence is very, very strong regarding this issue as well. And this is a red line. I also believe that there's a big picture forming in the region. We talked about a lot of dynamics. I want to talk about one more dynamic that's forming in the region. Russia. We have a war in Ukraine right now. There is a likelihood that Russia can gain control of the Black Sea. If Russia does gain control of the Black Sea, we're going to see a much larger Russian presence in the Aegean and Mediterranean going forward. This is a problem. There's a problem for Turkey. There's a problem for Israel. There's a problem for Greece. And there's a problem for the other actors in the region as well. More Russian presence in the Mediterranean means one of three scenarios: confrontation, cooperation, or competition. And each of these three scenarios have negatives or cons to it, especially when we think of all three of these actors, Turkey, Israel, and Greece, as either NATO allies or very close American allies as well. So I think as this bigger picture is forming of less United States, more possibility of more Russia, and this bigger picture comes into grasp, I think these other flashpoint problems are going to be much more dealable going forward.
Thank you, Yusuf. You touched upon many significant points, and you said safety nets, and now I want to move on to one of these safety nets, actually, regarding the relations and the regional dynamics. Amichai, during President Herzog's visit, regional cooperation was the primary focus of President Erdogan's speech, with particular reference to energy security in the Eastern Mediterranean. He also announced that the Minister of Energy, Turkey's Minister of Energy, would soon send a delegation to Israel for more talks. And we know that Ankara has expressed Turkey's interest on numerous occasions in both making use of Israeli gas and transporting it to Europe. And in this respect, what developments should we expect, if any, in the near future? And while the feasibility of the EastMed pipeline project is a matter of debate, and the US has recently withdrawn its support from that project, how viable is the proposed pipeline via Turkey?
So I think, like Yusuf said before, it's a time of different times these days. And when you see the story about Russia, Europe, and the gas, and Europe wanting to reduce the dependency on Russian gas until 2030 or something like this, then the question is from where you can get gas into Europe. So they were talking with the Qataris, they were talking with countries in Africa, but I think suddenly the pipeline from Israel to Turkey and then to Europe, then suddenly the options comes alive, because like you said, the EastMed is probably quite dead at this point. The Americans' statement a few months ago really made a deal, made this pipeline really something. In the beginning, it was already a very difficult project to do, and the American statement really put it down. And at least I'll talk from what I know. The Turkish view is that this is a big issue from them, and they want to do it with Israel. And they even talk with the Americans about it. They're telling them, listen, you don't want gas from Russia? We got a great gas source. Come and join us, maybe, and try and pressure Israel to do this pipeline. But I think, from what I'm speaking with Israel at this point, they are not too much enthusiastic about it, meaning they are saying we need to talk about it, we need to hear the Turkish proposal about it, and see what can be done and how we can trust that this pipeline is really going to work and stay, even if relations are a bit shaky, because some even tell me that we might need the Israeli security cabinet to convene to decide if we want to take gas from Israel through Turkey to Europe. So it seems here as a not such an easy business decision, but really a much more security issue, a much more strategic issue than maybe it was a few years ago. Now, because of the ups and downs in the last years, Israeli officials saying, listen, we're thinking about it, we would like to hear it. And former Minister Steinitz had good relations with Turkey, and he spoke with them about this gas pipeline a lot of times. So the idea has always been floated since 2016. The question is, I think, how will Turkey be able to convince Israel to go in this project? Because, like I said, Israelis are not so enthusiastic of going there. But, because of Russia, because of all the events in Europe, and maybe Americans will come in, things might change.
Yeah, thank you, Amichai. Speaking of the energy issues and the Eastern Mediterranean, my next question is for you, Galia. Israel is not the only country that Turkey is improving ties with. Ankara has taken important steps to enhance its relations with regional actors such as the UAE, as Yusuf mentioned, and Egypt. This situation is not unique to the Middle East, of course. Turkey and Greece are also working to improve bilateral relations with the support and encouragement from the European Union. And Amichai, as Amichai told us, considering the crisis in the Middle East and the unfeasibility of the East Med pipeline, to what extent can the rapprochement between Turkey and Israel affect Israel-Greece relations?
So there's a tendency to see a zero-sum game. That if Turkey-Israel relations are good, then Greece-Israel relations are bad, and vice versa. But I think it's simplistic. I think it ignores that we can cooperate in issues that do not antagonize third parties. And I think there's also, on many issues, a need for a regional approach. Take the shortage of water, take disaster management, take, in general, climate change. These need a regional approach in which we all cooperate to deal with these very difficult and challenging phenomena. But even if I take the zero-sum game, I think we have seen in 2021 a relaxation of tensions in the East Med, and in this context, an improvement in Greece-Turkey relations is complementary to an improvement in Israel-Turkey relations. And in this respect, if we see the continuation of the relaxation of tensions, then maybe there will be less need of Israel-Greece cooperation in the security field, because there will be less perception in the region in general. And I think that's positive. Let me just add about the energy element. I think I join Amichai's skepticism. I think basically Israel is now basically content with the Egyptian option. There was uncertainties about using Egyptian liquefying facilities, but it's been going on quite well. And it doesn't mean, some of this Israeli gas is getting to Turkey through these Egyptian liquefying facilities. And some of the gas may be used for electricity production, which will be then transported to Europe through the Euroconnector. So I also don't think there's pipelines going to be built, not the pipeline from Israel to Turkey, nor the one, the East Med pipeline. But this gas is getting to Turkey and is getting to Europe, just not in the ways we envisioned in 2015, 2016.
Thank you, Galia. I actually agree with you regarding the zero-sum game policy. In the time of reconciliation and normalization process, policies based on zero-sum game, I think, will be less important. So, Yusuf, according to many, the 1990s is viewed as the golden age, referring to the strategic partnership between Turkey and Israel. Is it possible for relations to return to something similar in the future? If so, what will be the main steps, or let's say first steps, in order to re-establish trust? What are the potential obstacles as well standing in the way of such a rapprochement? And we talked about energy. Maybe you can start from that point.
Yeah, I do want to talk a little about the pipeline as well. While Galia and Amikai said some people are skeptical in Israel, I like to connect the dots and look at what's going on now. Before the Israeli president's visit to Turkey, he visited both the Greek Cypriots and Greece as well. Then he came to Turkey, and 3 days after he left, the Greek prime minister came to Turkey. So I don't think this traffic is a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence. I don't think it's a coincidence that Kyriakos Mitsotakis came 3 days after Herzog left. I think there was definitely some talk of some type of coordination in the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, when we look at what's going on with Israeli gas, yes, they are using LNG facilities in Egypt, but when we look at the volume that can be transported and at the prices it can be transported through a pipeline, obviously it's much more cost effective, much more secure, and much quicker via pipeline over Turkey. Now, it's been over a decade since the major gas field like Leviathan has been discovered, and Israel's yet to sell any meaningful gas to Europe in any type of meaningful quantity. And as the geopolitical backdrop shows, Europe is desperate to get out of the grasp of this Russian gas monopoly. It's looking for options. It's saying, can Azerbaijan be an option? Can Qatar be an option? Can other countries be an option? When in reality, the quickest and most feasible option is probably Israeli gas. The only problem is building this pipeline. One of the problems of this pipeline will be that it's going to most likely run through waters of the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots as well. Is that a problem? Frankly, I don't think that's a problem. I think that's an opportunity. I believe that the Israeli side can very easily negotiate with their Greek Cypriot allies on what's going on geographically. And until that pipeline comes north, I think we've already seen comments from the Turkish Cypriot president saying that he looks warmly upon a Israeli gas pipeline. So anything north of the southern side of Cyprus seems to be very, very optimistic about a pipeline. So I don't see any geopolitical problems that Israel can't solve. I think that the Turkish side is all for it. This is a huge safety net. When countries make money together, that relationship tends to strengthen a lot. So I definitely think there is a possibility. Another safety net, as we were talking about, I think security and the alignment. We saw Turkey and Israel together on the same side geopolitically for the first time in Azerbaijan, in Nagorno-Karabakh. I think this was very huge, being on the same side, having the same view towards a conflict. I think in Syria, interests are very, very similar. Turkey is very, very disturbed by the presence of Shiite militia in Iraq and in Syria. When we look at the Turkey-Iran border, it's 534 kilometers long. But the border between Turkey and Shiite militia is 1,800 kilometers long. That's a national security problem. If you notice, Turkey doesn't make any negative comments about Israeli airstrikes in Syria. I'm sure they're secretly and very quietly happy with that development. I didn't see any negative comments coming out of Israel when Turkey launched airstrikes against Hezbollah in Idlib as well. That was probably very quietly applauded in Israel as well. So we are seeing a security alignment. That's going to be another important safety net, because when we look at the 80s and 90s relationship, we saw serious defense military cooperation, joint exercises, and both of these countries were the backbone of the United States Middle East security architecture during that time period. And I think Washington would be incredibly happy if they can restruct that security architecture in the region, especially when we enter a decade or decades of less U.S. engagement. They would be very happy to be able to know that that security architecture is in place as a caretaker, as a trusted ally in that region, working together to counter terrorism, working together to stop ISIS, stop Al-Qaeda in that region, stop Shiite-backed militia, counter Iranian aggression, make sure that Mediterranean waters are free and secure for travel. So again, I don't see any reason why the relationship can improve. Can it get back to the 80s and 90s? I think that will require American coordination as well, not just Turkey-Israel cooperation. I think America would have to seriously want to see that cooperation blossom and support that cooperation. So I think it will improve. But to get back to that era of the 80s and 90s, America would also have to be on board, or there would have to be another driver. If not America, the EU would have to seriously support that collaboration in the region.
Very important points, Yusuf. We will come to U.S. role and Azerbaijan as well within a few minutes, but I have a quick question to Amichai. Amichai, Turkey and Israel have somehow followed a similar line of foreign policy in the Russia-Ukraine war, particularly in facilitating intermediary talks between Moscow and Kiev. Which reasons led these countries to resemble in engaging war with the war in Ukraine? If any, how will such a relatively common foreign policy in line affect these countries' positions in the conflicts of the MENA region?
So, like you said, it's very interesting that also Israel and also Turkey are able to speak with both the Russians and the Ukrainians. Even Turkey succeeded in getting together these two foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine in the same room. So I think it shows really the Israeli playing the game like a bit like Turkey, meaning these are two countries, they don't put sanctions at this point. So it's not their strategy. Of course, each country has its own enemies at this point. But I think this current crisis maybe is basing these two not allies, but countries in the Middle East at this point as countries that you can trust and ask to solve maybe problems. So I think this issue and this war in Europe might increase how people look at these two countries. I think when you look at each country in the Middle East, I think Israel and Turkey maybe have different thoughts on each country. Maybe like on Syria, it's the same like you spoke, but I think on the UAE, maybe different thoughts. On Saudis, different thoughts. Probably on Egypt, there are different thoughts between Israel and Turkey. So again, I think it's good for the two countries to be a countries of diplomacy. It makes them stronger from how the world views them, but I don't think it really will have influence on what's going on in the region. But the question is, again, I don't think it depends on how they deal with with Russia and Ukraine. At the end is how these two countries can deal with, because like in the 90s, it was a very close alliance, unbreakable with military, economic, everything cooperated together. And when you see, for example, Bennett this week meeting MBZ and Egypt Sisi in Cairo, and it's a picture of a new alliance, the question is, well, if Turkey and Israel can form also some kind of alliance these days. So there's, like Herzog saying, there's a lot of distrust. We know what was in the past. The question is, how will they take the past and make a brighter future?
Thank you, Amichai. Thank you for all contributions. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, Amichai Stein have to leave us, but we will continue for our discussion. Thank you, Amichai.
Thank you very much.
So I want to continue with Galia. So Galia, in one of your recent publications, you asserted that Azerbaijan shares many common interests with Turkey and Israel. While the strategic bond uniting Baku and Ankara is as strong as ever, you highlight that Israel and Azerbaijan are also allies in the quest to counter Iran. Yusuf also mentioned this point, and making a case for strong trilateral cooperation, Such an argument is seldom mentioned in the media and public sphere. Do you think this trilateral partnership is feasible?
Yes, well, regarding Israel's support to Azerbaijan, Israel has also been very consistent, and actually, Turkey and Israel were always on the same page with regard to Azerbaijan. Now, with regard to Iranian threat, Yusuf started to elaborate on it, but in general, we know that Iran's regional ambitions and its attempts to increase its influence in the region are threatening many countries in the region. And if the Iran deal will be signed and the sanctions will be lifted from Iran, and then it will have more money to do these policies. And Yusuf mentioned that on the issue of the Caucasus, Israel and Turkey are on the same side, and in Syria are on the same side. And I would also mention in Iraq. I think Iran's influence in Iraq, especially in northern Iraq, is problematic. And also in this issue, Israel and Turkey are on the same side. Of course, each country has its nuances. And for Israel, there's more concern of what is happening in Lebanon and Syria, and for Turkey, it's more Syria and Iraq. But from Iranian perspective, of course, it's all connected. There's linkages between these arenas. So definitely there are shared interests, and this is something that should connect these countries.
Thank you, Galia. Since we have less time, so Yusuf, I came to other safety nets you mentioned. So although political relations have gone through many crises, economic relations between Ankara and Tel Aviv have been relatively stable. Considering the post-pandemic circumstances in the global economy, what are the areas in which the two countries can foster better economic relations? In which areas can Turkey and Israel also enter a rivalry in terms of being an economic stronghold in the region?
Well, the pandemic taught us many things. Also, this era is an era of opportunity. Now, the pandemic taught us that you are only as strong as the weakest link of your supply line economically. And I think that was a very costly lesson for some countries who depended solely on one or two countries for their supply lines. And it was a huge opportunity for countries that had very strong supply lines. I think this is an area that Turkey excelled in throughout the pandemic. And we saw this through the humanitarian and medical aid that it sent to over 150 countries. While many countries had problems procuring masks, ventilators, Turkey was having domestic solutions to all these problems and being able to not only be self-sufficient, but also provide tremendous aid. Now, we also live in an era of opportunity. We're seeing many major mega logistics projects, many intercontinental, intra-country and inter-country projects going on. China's Belt and Road project. We are seeing a lot of ports being purchased. We are seeing the EU revamp its logistics and also try to provide alternatives for countries to the Belt and Road. We are seeing the United States working on its own infrastructure with the infrastructure bill and also provide alternatives to the Belt and Road, trying to keep countries on its side logistically. So this is very, very important because the way the world's logistic map is being formed in the next 3 to maybe 5, maybe 10 years is going to determine the routes of trade over the next 3, maybe 4 decades. This is an area where Turkey is very, very lucky because of its geopolitical positioning. You have the Black Sea, you have the Aegean Sea, you have the Sea of Marmara, the Turkish Straits, you have the Mediterranean. Then very, very close again, right down towards the Suez Canal and making its way out into the Indian Ocean and onwards. So logistically, Turkey's very blessed. All the way, the lines running to Central Asia, the East-West Trans-Caspian corridor, all the way to China, the Islamabad, Tehran, Istanbul train, and so on. Israel's also blessed. It has ports. It has partners who have extensive logistic networks as well. So this is definitely another area where both will be able to cooperate. I think logistics are going to be very important. I think meeting each other's supply line needs are going to be very important. And the countries that are able to fill each other's critical supply line needs we'll end up having very strong relationships and very, very strong safety nets going forward. So I think that's somewhere that's very important. Where can both sides end up competing in? I think they can end up competing in the defense sector. I think that's a possibility. Turkish firms, Israeli firms, both make very, very quality drones, very quality radars. Turkey's seriously developing its anti-air defense systems. Israel has the Iron Dome. If Turkey's air defense is successful, it can compete. So weapons and defense is an area that both sides can compete, but it's also an area that both sides can cooperate in as well. That depends on how the business-to-business relationship is going to be going forward. And obviously, when the sector is defense, it is part of national security. Every weapons sale has government oversight. So I think the government-to-government relationship will also determine what type of cooperation or competition there's going to be on a defense-to-defense level. I also want to talk a little about, as Galia was talking about Iran, and as I was mentioning, logistics corridors. I think after the Karabakh War, the possibility of a corridor through Zengilan connecting Nakhchivan to the rest of Azerbaijan, very, very important for Turkey. Also very, very important security-wise for Israel, because it will serve as a barrier, also an important trade route that will be an alternative to Iran going forward. Now, Iran used that area very, very importantly for its trade and monopolizing the logistics of that region, because Turkey was always cut off. Turkey either had to use Georgia as a trade route going forward or Iran as a trade route going forward. Now, if Turkey has its own trade route, that is very important to Turkey, and that will hinder Iran going forward. So I think that's something that's very important. And another thing I wanted to mention also, Israel has been able to freely launch airstrikes in Syria to meet its national security concerns. Before I was talking about an increased Russian presence going forward in the Mediterranean. I don't think Israel will be able to easily meet its national security concerns in Syria in the future when there is an increased Russian presence. I think while they are allowing for this to happen, when they increase their presence in this region, especially at Latakia and Tartus, I don't think they're going to allow this type of action by Israel. So I think that's another important national security concern going forward. What will an increased Russian presence mean? I think this is something that the Israelis don't discuss enough amongst themselves, and I think this is definitely something they need to look into going forward.
Thank you. So there are many things on the ground. So I agree with you that the competition, fields for competition can be also for cooperation, and that is we can see in the near future of Turkey-Israel relations. So Galia, until now, we talked about two countries' relations from the state perspective, governmental level, but there is also a societal level that is very important within this particular relationship. Any change or shift in these two different levels, of course, occurs in different ways and durations. And a recent survey conducted by Pelephone found that Turkey is among the most popular travel destinations for Israelis. Do you think the normalization process will pave the way for better mutual engagement between the two societies through tourism?
So yes, tourism is very important in promoting people-to-people relations, no doubt on this issue. And just before actually the COVID pandemic, there was a return to the numbers we saw pre-2010, pre-crisis numbers of Israeli tourists in Turkey. We had 500,000 tourists in 2009 going to Turkey. Of course, Turkish Airlines is a very popular airline that the Israeli take and transits through Istanbul. But then we had the pandemic, and we know tourism has suffered, and Turkey as a tourism superpower really was also one of the countries that suffered from the decrease in tourism. So we still don't know the pandemic effects. Are we going away from them or not? There's also the issue of rising fuel prices, which are making airfare more expensive. So we don't know if people will go back to their how they traveled before the pandemic. But Israeli tourists are definitely see Turkey as an interesting destination and have loved going to Turkey. But they're looking also for new things, and the Abraham Accords provides now new destinations for Israelis. Israelis couldn't go to Dubai before, or only Israelis with foreign passports. And Morocco now is more accessible to Israelis. But that doesn't mean also that Turkey cannot be competitive, because we know also Turkey has so many varied tourist destinations in its territory. And in this respect, for example, the idea that was floated before the pandemic, but is now gaining track of the Tel Aviv-Izmir route, I think that's a fantastic idea, because this is really a new destination for the Israelis, and I think that's the way to go. Basically, showing Israelis that there's more to Turkey than the places they've gone to before.
Yeah, I think it seems that the new destinations will open as well. So, Yusuf, we move to the, let's say, soft topics, I mean, the cultural issues. But my last question is about the US role, because you touched upon this issue, but um, I also want to ask something about that. The increasing mood of regional reconciliation in the Middle East is linked with the United States downsizing military presence and diminishing role in the region, as you talked about. On the other hand, we know that there's a strategic alliance between Israel and the US. Is it possible to talk about the US role in Turkey-Israel normalization efforts, or should we consider this rapprochement independent from Washington? And lastly, what could be the effect of Turkey-Israel rapprochement on Turkey-US relations?
Well, I think in one aspect, we could say it is independent from Washington. Why do I say that? Because I think one of the reasons why this rapprochement was triggered is because there's going to be less Washington in the Middle East. So I think it is independent in that aspect. I think, though, very lately, especially with the war in Ukraine, I think many of the regional actors and many of the NATO countries returned back to their factory settings. When I mean factory settings, they're Cold War settings. Everyone got resetted, and everyone remembered how they were during the Cold War and their stance, their military posturing, and they recognize threats that they have not seen in almost 3 decades appear once again. So I think that supports reconciliation in the region again, because when we look at NATO, Turkey being a NATO country, Greece being a NATO country, the U.S. being a NATO country, I'm looking at the southeast flank plus the United States. And even though Israel is not a NATO country, we can very easily call Israel an extension of NATO, because it has such warm relations with the United States and with many NATO countries as well. And it is part of the security architecture of the United States. There is a lot of intelligence sharing. There is a lot of military cooperation. So it may not be a member, but that doesn't mean it's not very, very close to the alliance. So I think this return to factory settings and this return to a Cold War security understanding is definitely going to support this as well, and support this understanding of what a rapprochement between Turkey and Israel would bring to the United States in a positive manner. So I definitely don't think that it is, I definitely think it's something that helps. I think the U.S. understanding of what is to be gained by Turkey and Israel being friends again, or at least neutral against each other, because there will be flashpoints. And even if it's not friends again, even as long as both actors can compartmentalize problems and work together pragmatically, even that's a bonus for Washington. So when they look at the region and they look at who they can work with the region in the future going forward, obviously, anyone who opens up a map and looks at the geography that Turkey occupies, its military power, its ability to not only change realities on the ground in the region, but also being able to, if necessary, administer peace diplomatically through the region, bring parties together. No other actor is an alternative to Turkey. And when we look at Israel-U.S. relationship, it is their number one relationship in the region. Nobody is closer to the United States. So I can't see anyone in the U.S. being unhappy or not supporting what's going on between these two countries.
Thank you, Yusuf, for reminding the geopolitical reality, which almost always matters. So, actually, there are many details to discuss, but our time is up, unfortunately. Thank you for all your contributions and remarks. That was a great discussion. So, for our audience, thank you for listening to us and stay tuned for next digital debates. Have a nice day.